Forget everything you know about medieval poverty. What you are about to see is the reconstruction of the only institution that survived the fall of Rome and became the beating heart of civilization. At the height of the 14th century, while kings disputed over land, the Vatican and the monasteries governed the soul and time of every human being. Imagine a Europe shrouded in mud, where the only light of hope emanated from immense stained glass windows. But how did those who held the keys and the secrets of the land actually live? Through artificial intelligence, we will enter the papal chambers and monastic cells to reveal a reality that cinema has never shown. The church was not just a block of faith. It was a monumental administrative machine. But this power brought constant tension. How to balance the gospel's message of humility with the need to govern an entire continent in the midst of chaos. At the top of this pyramid was the Pope. But he was not in Rome, he was in Avignon, France. Imagine a palace that was at once an impenetrable fortress and the center of European luxury, where marble met gold under constant surveillance. The Pope's life was a ritual of precision. He was not just a spiritual leader, he was a diplomat who received ambassadors from every kingdom. His robes were works of art in silk and gold thread, every detail designed to project the majesty of God on earth. While scarcity plagued distant villages, the papal table was a logistical spectacle. Rare spices, wines from exclusive vineyards, and meats prepared by master chefs. But make no mistake, every banquet was a political tool to seal alliances and maintain peace. Contrary to the myth of filth, the high hierarchy of the church maintained superior standards of hygiene. The Palace of Avignon possessed drainage systems and bathtubs made of noble wood. Water scented with herbs was not vanity, but a necessity for those dealing with international diplomacy. Below the Pope, the cardinals were the princes of the church. They administered finances and laws. Their palaces were intelligence centers, where news of caravans from Asia and maritime routes arrived long before any king knew. To be a cardinal was to be a chess player on a board. In the cities, the bishop was the judge, the administrator, and the protector. They were the architects of the great cathedrals, but how did they finance these works that lasted for centuries? The answer lies in a system of tithes and donations that moved the economy of the Middle Ages. But here is something that few tell. Why did the richest men of the time choose to live in frozen stone cells inside monasteries? Stay with me, for what we will discover about the routine of the monks will change your perception of productivity. The monasteries were the technology factories of the era. If you saw a monk in the Middle Ages, you would not see just someone praying. You would see an engineer, a botanist, and a scribe working under a discipline that would make any modern army look disorganized. Everything was governed by ora et labora, pray and work. Time was measured by bells, which marked the 7 daily prayers. This rigor created the first mechanical clocks in history, for God's time needed to be exact. Imagine a silent room where dozens of monks copied manuscripts by hand for 12 hours a day. Without them, Greek philosophy, Arabic medicine, and Roman history would have disappeared. Each book was a jewel that could be worth the price of an entire village. The monks' food was an example of sustainability. They were the greatest experts in fish farming, cheese-making, and viticulture. They did not eat just to survive. They created the foundations of European gastronomy through constant experimentation. Curiously, the clergy lived much longer than the nobles and peasants. Why? A balanced diet, regular hygiene, and access to their own hospitals created a bubble of health in a world surrounded by diseases. In an era without a state, the church was the only healthcare system. Each monastery had an infirmary. They treated the sick with herbs, prayers, and a knowledge of anatomy preserved from centuries of observation. Now descend from the great cathedrals to the small villages. The village priest was the only literate man the peasants knew. He was the counselor, the justice of peace, and often the only one who defended the people against the abuses of the feudal lords. Unlike the bishops, the rural priest lived simply. He planted his own garden and wore rustic wool. His house was open to all. He felt the same cold and the same hunger as his parishioners, creating an unbreakable bond with the community. The Latin Mass was not just a cult, it was a breathtaking sensory experience. incense coming from the east, Gregorian chants that made the stones vibrate, and light passing through the stained glass. It was a moment of absolute beauty in the life of a peasant. The church courtyard was where everything happened: markets, royal announcements, and community meetings. Life revolved around the liturgical calendar. The feasts of the saints were the only moments of rest and joy guaranteed to the people, but not all was peace. The universities born within the church seethed with logical debates. Men like Thomas Aquinas proved that reason was the best tool for understanding faith. Studying was a form of worship. Have you ever wondered how the church dealt with the Black Death that was knocking at the door in 1348? What happened within the sacred walls when death became omnipresent is a lesson in courage and sacrifice. When the plague arrived, the priests and monks did not flee. They were the ones who stayed to give the last sacrament and bury the dead. The mortality rate among the clergy was devastating, as they were the only ones who refused to abandon the sick. The monasteries were polygons of efficiency. The cloister was a garden for meditation, the kitchen a processing center, and the library the vault of human wisdom. Every angle had a spiritual and practical purpose. Confession was the most powerful intelligence tool of the Middle Ages. Through it, the Church understood social tensions, crimes, and the desires of the people, allowing it to act as a mediator before revolts exploded. Make no mistake, the abbesses were women of immense power. They governed convents that were centers of education and textile production. Some advised kings and popes, proving that the female voice had weight in the ecclesiastical structure. Polyphony was born in the cathedrals. The monks discovered that different voices could create a unique harmony. For them, this was the mathematical proof of God's order in the universe. Music was the sonic architecture of heaven. If today we appreciate great wines, we owe it to the monks. They mapped the best soils in Europe and developed fermentation techniques that we use to this day. For the Church, wine was the blood of Christ, and for that reason, it needed to be perfect. The church courts were often seen as fairer than the civil ones. They focused on rehabilitation and penance, not just physical punishment. Many preferred to be judged by a bishop than by a feudal baron. But how did they keep this empire functioning for many years without a central army? The secret was in education and diplomacy, something we will detail now by looking at the secrets of the papal ambassadors. The apostolic nuncios traveled to all the courts of Europe. They were the most instructed men in the world. They did not carry weapons, they carried letters and influence. They could stop wars with just an excommunication. But do not be deceived. The same power that preserved science and fed the poor also possessed an implacable face. Through the Inquisition and the Tribunal of the Holy Office, the Church monitored thoughts and punished deviations with frightening efficiency. In this era, challenging dogma was not just a sin. It was a crime against the social order, where excommunication could transform a powerful king into a pariah, isolated from his entire kingdom. The network of monasteries functioned as the first hotels in the world. Any traveler, rich or poor, had the right to shelter and food for 3 days. Hospitality was a sacred law that kept Europe connected. Casting a bell was the greatest technological challenge of medieval metallurgy. The sound needed to reach leagues away to warn of fires, invasions, or the hour of prayer. The bell was the radio of the Middle Ages. Many priests were astronomers. They used astrolabes to calculate the Easter calendar. They looked at the stars not for divination, but to understand the immensity of the divine creation through mathematics. The Gothic cathedrals were the stone Bibles for those who did not know how to read. Every statue, every gargoyle, and every pillar told a story. They were built to make man feel small before God, but great for being part of his work. Observe these details that AI recovered: the vibrant color of the statues, the perfectly aligned botanical gardens, and the light of the candles reflecting in the silver chalices. This was not a grey era, it was an explosion of symbolism and color. The cassock was not just a garment, it was a service uniform. The colors indicated the rank: the white of the Pope, the red of the cardinals, the black of the priests. Every fiber of fabric told a story of hierarchy and dedication. Inside the papal libraries, there were maps that showed lands many did not even believe existed. The geographical knowledge of the Church was vast, fed by missionaries who went to the ends of the Silk Road. While the nobles accumulated lands for themselves, the church administered the patrimony of St. Peter to finance soup kitchens and asylums. Charity was the social security network of a brutal world. But what about the temptations? How did powerful men deal with the wealth that passed through their hands? We will now see how the mendicant orders, such as the Franciscans, emerged to purify the church from within. St. Francis of Assisi changed everything. His followers lived among the lepers and possessed nothing. They proved that the greatest strength of the church came from radical renunciation, winning the hearts of millions of poor people. The church was an institution of contrasts. On one side, the brilliance of the liturgical jewels. On the other, the bare foot of the friar in the mud. This balance is what allowed it to speak with kings and slaves at the same time. The parish schools were the seeds of modern literacy. Poor boys with talent were recruited by the church to study, becoming the only form of social ascent in a rigid feudal system. The Cistercian monks transformed swamps into fertile lands. They developed the system of crop rotation and seed selection, ensuring that the population of Europe doubled between the 11th and 13th centuries. Look at the precision of these illuminated letters. Each scribe monk left a bit of his life on these pages. Without the silence of the monasteries, the voice of Plato and Aristotle would have been silenced forever. There was a constant dispute. Who commands more, the Pope or the King? This tension forced the development of international laws and modern diplomacy, creating a system of checks and balances in Europe. In 1348, death was a close neighbor. The Church developed the ars moriendi, the art of dying well. It was the psychological and spiritual support for facing the unknown with dignity and peace. The monastery garden was a replica of paradise. Medicinal plants, fruit trees, and water fountains. They created the science of botany, while the rest of the world only harvested what nature offered by chance. For the medieval clergy, discovering the laws of nature was discovering the mind of God. They did not see conflict between the laboratory and the altar. For them, they were two paths to the same truth. What happened in the secret meetings of the conclaves to choose a new pope? The total isolation, the intrigues, and the search for the divine will created a tension that paralyzed entire cities while waiting for the white smoke. In this reconstruction, we see the glory of the tapestries, the texture of the millennial stones, and the dignity in the faces of those men. The Church gave the Middle Ages its visual identity and its cultural soul. Latin was the language of the internet of the time. A priest from Poland could talk to a bishop from Portugal without barriers. This created the first global intellectual community in human history. As we look at 1348, we see an institution that did not break under the weight of the plague. It adapted, cared, and survived, proving that its foundation was stronger than any plague or empire. Many of the institutions we use today, hospitals, universities, and courts, have their DNA in these men who lived 7 centuries ago. We are the heirs of the medieval organization. The life of the priests and the Pope in 1348 was not just about prayers. It was about keeping the flame of civilization lit in the darkest night of history. If you felt the greatness of this legacy, leave your comment. The Middle Ages was not an era of darkness, but of light concentrated in strategic places. If you want to continue reconstructing the most fascinating centuries of humanity, leave your like and subscribe. Until the next era.